All right, so next up, we've got the Federal Policy Landscape with Representative Randy Fine, moderated by Dan Murphy. Come on up, gentlemen.
I'm interesting, I promise.
This one on? Yeah. Okay, thanks for having us. So we were chatting in the green room before we came in, and I am a Floridian. I live just north of the Congressman's district, but I'm very familiar with his time as a public official in Florida, State House, State Senate, tough, business-oriented, conservative, MAGA before it was cool to be MAGA. We talked about his district. Runs roughly Daytona to St. Augustine, south to north, and then all the way across to I-75, including at least a portion of the villages, which we all hope to live in someday.
Disneyland for old people.
There we go. So, a guy with very conservative credentials, and here we are. We're sitting at a cannabis conference. What are you doing here?
Well, that's actually a great question on many levels. I'll tell you a little bit about me, and then I'll answer that question. So I'm the accidental congressman. Had you told me a year ago that I would be in Congress, I would have told you that you were crazy. So I spent 8 years in the Florida House and then 5 months in the Florida Senate. On the second week after I was elected to the Florida Senate, so I got elected to the Florida Senate last November when President Trump got elected. 2 weeks after we both got elected to our various offices, the president called and asked if I'd consider running to replace Mike Waltz, who was the congressman before me, who's now the UN ambassador. And I told him I would think about it, and I'd come down to Mar-a-Lago. I had been on the ballot every 2 years for 10 years. I was excited I was going to be in the state Senate. I wasn't going to have to run for office for 4 years. I told him I'd think about it, and then he went on Truth Social and tweeted out that I was running. So that's how I called him. I said, sir, I thought we were going to talk about it. He said, well, Randy, you've always told me you'll do whatever I need you to do, and now you can't say no. So I got elected to Congress on April 1st. It wasn't an April Fool's joke. It was for real. I got sworn in on April 2nd, and so I have been in this job for 7 months. But I do have a wealth of experience on this issue because I was in the Florida House for 8 years, my final 2 of which I chaired the Health Care Committee at the state level. And I was actually in the Florida House when we had to pass the implementing legislation for medical marijuana. So I got elected in 2016, and I will tell you, I voted against it. And I was pretty passionate that I thought it was a bad idea. But I don't like it when Democrats don't follow the law, and I don't like it when Republicans don't follow the law. And when the voters of Florida overwhelmingly voted to make medical marijuana legal in the state of Florida, I said what I think doesn't really matter. It's what the voters think. And so we passed a regime to allow medical marijuana to go forward in Florida in 2016, and here's where we are now. But even though I opposed it, I always thought part of how it was done was stupid. So I was in the casino business a long time ago, so I'm not someone who gets to sit in judgment of how other people make their money. And I often marveled at the fact that states would legalize the casino business, but then would make them do really, really dumb things to stay in operation. My favorite one was having to spend $100 million to build a fake lake, literally fake, dig a hole with water that you couldn't go anywhere, then to float a boat on top of the water so that you could say you had a casino that was floating on a boat. I mean, literally, it was fake lake, fake boat, $100 million, flushed down the toilet, no value to anyone except, I guess, the people who built the fake lake and the fake boat. But I thought, we could have given $50 million to the taxpayer, save $50 million, and everyone would be better off. And so I saw a lot of similarities to that in your business. In the sense that we have said this is a business that can exist, but then you can't have a bank account, And I thought this is just dumb. If we're going to have it, then we should allow it to function as a business like anyone else. And so part of the reason I've become a proponent for rescheduling is marijuana is not heroin, and so we should allow, if we're going to allow this thing to be on, it seems, every corner in Florida, we should allow our medical schools and our doctors to look into it and research it and study it. So if we're going to have it, it can be used in the best and most effective way possible. So I think I'm a pretty good advocate for what you all want to do, because I come from the perspective of, I wish you never were in business. But I think that gives me a fair amount of credibility to say, if you are going to be, how do we make sure that your business operates in the way that is going to be best for you and best for the country and best for society as a whole. So that's the perspective I bring, despite the fact that I've only been in Congress for 5 minutes.
So it's an interesting background. So here we are now in Washington. We have a president that everyone in this room can probably repeat with their eyes closed, tweeted out last September that he supported the ballot initiative in Florida, was going to vote for it, but more importantly, thought we should make progress on the federal level. What are some of your top-line thoughts on marijuana reform in Congress?
Well, actually, you know, I'm reasonably close to the president. I'm the only person in America that he's endorsed 3 times in the last 18 months. So he endorsed me for the state senate in my special election, and then for my reelection. And someone was talking about he does things when he does them. He endorsed me for my reelection at 8:45 in the morning on a Saturday, and then texted me at 9:30 asking why I had not written back to thank him. I'm like, sir, it's Saturday morning, I'm asleep. But I will tell you, I think part of the reason why President Trump adopted that approach, and I'm going to send regards from him today, is one of the people he trusts the most is Joe Gruters. Joe was my roommate in Tallahassee 1 year ago. I'm a new state senator. Joe is a longtime state senator. Joe and I and my chief of staff, Jason Fisher, who's over there, we all got elected to the Florida House together in 2016. And Joe obviously was a big champion of this. And 1 year later, Joe is now the chairman of the Republican National Committee. So you know there's someone who agrees with all of you sitting in the chief political job for the Republican Party in Washington, and Joe's obviously a big fan. We're roommates again, so that's funny how life works. I think what we can do at the federal level is optimize the business. So obviously we can push for rescheduling. We can push to allow you all not to have to move your money around in armored cars. We can push to fund and allow medical research, which I think we should settle some of the questions that people have out there. Saying it can be out there and you can sell it on the street corner in storefronts, but you can't actually study its effects on people is insane. And frankly, the people who should want this the most are the people who oppose it the most. Because if those who oppose the idea of medical marijuana are right, then the research will show them to be right. And so, you know, what I want to do is bring common sense reforms to a business that exists, and to bring it out of the darkness. Again, much like I did in the casino world back when I worked for a living. You know, now I'm just a guy who talks.
So I've been at this job as a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. now for 25 years. I guess I am the swamp. But
it's too cold to be the swamp. Like I'm from Florida. We'd like a little swampier weather
that's
today.
Swamp. So I've always said in my business, the best lobbyists are the people that are actually the men and women who I represent, who are in the business of fill in the blank, whatever their issue is. Could be defense, could be cannabis, could be all kinds of things. And they make the best lobbyists because they wake up every day and they care about their business, et cetera. So all of these folks, I'm sure, have engaged in what we call shoe leather lobbying, walking the halls of Congress, knocking on doors, showing up with appointment, maybe not with an appointment. As someone who's on the receiving end of that, what is your advice to this group on it? What obviously is still a controversial issue here in Washington, still working its way through the system. Let's just stick with the Republicans for a second. There are a lot of Republicans that are still, standoffish on this issue, despite the fact that it's legal at one level or another in 40-some states. So as someone who's been lobbied, both at the state level and the federal level, what is your advice to this group?
Well, I'm going to talk about how to go about it, and then I'll talk about what you should say. And again, this would work with me. I don't know if it would work with everybody else. There are various ways to reach out to an elected official, whether they're a state legislator or a member of Congress, and they are not all equally valuable. So for example, the one that has no value at all, none, is like making a comment on social media. Zero. No value. We don't see them. 90% of the ones that are made are fake by bots in other parts of the world. It makes no, and you can't tell who is saying it. So the people who I care about are the ones who can vote for me. I don't care that much. So when I go on television, and I've been on a fair amount, and my phone lights up afterwards, because people don't like what I have to say, my team asks where they're from, and I have news for you. If they're from California or Seattle, don't care. If they're from Florida, I kind of care. I mean, it's the state I represent. And if they're from my district, I really care. So my first advice is focus on the member that's yours. Whether that you have 2 senators, or you have everyone in this room has 2 senators and a congressman. And I actually think it's not the worst thing in the world to talk to other congressmen from your state. But we care about those who are going to vote for us. And here's why. So back when I was in business school a long time ago, it's funny, I don't remember most of it, but I don't have a good excuse, but I just don't remember it. It's been so long. But you remember certain things. I remember a case I read from British Airways. And the case was about how British Airways was trying to get their customers to complain. They literally made this big effort to get people to complain. Why would a business want people to complain? Well, the reason is they did some research and they found out that for every one person who complained, there were 300 other people who had the same complaint but were unwilling to make it. So when you take the time and effort to go to your member of Congress's office, they know there's a lot of other people who just aren't willing to do it. And I think it's not that hard to get an appointment if you can vote for them. So constituents matters. Phone calls are okay, letters are okay, but the best thing is in-person appointments. And bring a group of people. If you want to lobby your congressman, if you own a store, bring the employees with you. When 10 people who can vote for me show up in my office, it makes a bigger impression than when it's 1. So in-person appointments, that's going to make the biggest difference. Now, what should you say? Particularly if you're talking to conservative Republicans like me who may not fundamentally like the product that you have to sell. What I find works, and look, I was a national champion debater, so I sort of had to learn how to convince people of things. I always look to try to look for a way to find agreement with the person. And say, yeah, I get it, you don't like my business, okay? But conservatives live in the world the way it is, not the way they wish it was. We have to live in how it is, and it's there on the corner. So wouldn't you agree, Mr. Congressman, that if it's going to be on the corner, it's better for all involved that we can have a bank account than we have to drive around with trucks full of cash? I don't think you'll find a Republican congressman. They may say, yeah, we wish it would go away, but it's not going to go away. That ship has sailed. So aren't we better off looking to optimize this thing that we don't like? And again, you all are just 20 or 30 years behind the casino business that had to go through this same thing. Some of those places that made them float the fake boats don't make them do it anymore because they eventually realized this is dumb. And by the way, those conservative state legislators still don't like the casino business, but they came to the conclusion they had to operate in the world the way it was. So what I would say is look for opportunities where you can agree. Don't make it about the underlying issue or the underlying product. Make it about the things that everyone should agree. Don't you think you think this is so terrible? Don't you think we should have medical research? I would predict that most members of Congress have no idea that marijuana is scheduled the same as heroin. They have no idea. Why? It's because A, they just sort of oppose it in general. B, that we have lots of things to do. C, you can't be an expert on everything. And so they don't know. There was a time, wait, what? I remember when I found out, wait, I have these places all over my district, but they have to move their money around in armored vehicles? That's insane. So you should not assume that the people that you think are your opponents actually understand everything about your business, because they probably don't. And if you focus on those discrete areas where you probably will get agreement, that's how you move the ball down the field. Don't try to convince them that medical marijuana is a good idea or recreational marijuana is a good idea. You probably won't. But you probably can convince them you should be able to have a bank account and you should be able to do medical research on your product. That would be the way I would go about it.
So I'm guessing I'm a little bit older than you, but we grew up in the era of sort of Nancy Reagan, just say no, et cetera. There are still some members of Congress, probably more in the Senate than the House, that are still of that era. But my impression is this is an issue that, frankly, as members age out and move out of Congress, is becoming more and more acceptable. Is that a fair observation?
I don't know. I mean, it's because I've been there for 5 minutes. I don't know. I think the biggest issue is what you all have to remember is this is what you wake up every morning thinking about, what you live and breathe and do every day. It's how you make your living. It's how you feed your family. It's how you pay for your kids to go to college, go on vacation. This is not what the vast majority of members of Congress do. And the number of people who wake up thinking about this every day, whether they're for it or against it, is going to be fairly low. So I think part of your challenge is to make people care. And I think if you can make people care and you can educate them, you can do it. But I do think that as we have seen medical marijuana show up, and the world has not ended in Florida. Life in Florida is basically the same now as it was in 2015 before we passed it. I think talking about the use case in Florida, I can't speak to other states, but the use case in Florida, I think that reduces. There were a lot of people who still voted against the enabling legislation for medical marijuana. Even after it passed, I think with over 70% of the vote, there were some people who were still unwilling to vote for it. I don't know that a lot of those people, if they had to vote to renew it today, I think many of them would say, yeah, it's fine, I'm going to vote for it.
So you touched on, just from a business point of view, you talked a little bit about safer banking, and we may go back to that, safer banking, which is the first hurdle that all these folks are having to run cash businesses. But there's also the issue of taxes. So 280 tax, I'm sure most of the people in the room are lay awake at night staring at the ceiling over 280, because it almost makes it impossible to run a profitable business. Do you agree that otherwise legal state businesses that are following the rules and regulations of their state should be taxed just like all the other businesses?
Yeah, I do. Look, I wish we didn't have to pay taxes at all. I'm a small government guy. I think the government's way too big and collects too much in money. But yes, it is a business that has been legitimized. It should be treated like a legitimate business. That is my view. But the reason you hear me talk about banking before I talk about this is I would look for the easy wins. If you say, hey, treat us like every other business and let us take tax deductions, that does have the societal negative benefit of less revenue coming in the door to do whatever crazy thing government wants to do with it. Letting you have a bank account doesn't do anything that's bad. I mean, I guess there's probably lobbyists for the armored car business that would come and tell us how bad of an idea it is.
I don't represent the armored car business.
Okay. But yes, you should have that. But I would go for the arguments. I always look for the things where it's really hard to argue against it. Medical research. And then once you get those early wins, then you can go to the thing where there is a downside. Hey, you give us these benefits, you're going to bring less money in the door. Is it something we should do? Yes, but there is a fiscal impact to that, and that's what's going to make that a little bit harder, which is why I wouldn't make that the first thing on your list.
I mean, there's another aspect of safer banking, which these folks are the owners and run the businesses, and they're trying to, like you talked about, efficiently, but their employees can't get bank accounts, can't get a mortgage, can't do all the things that normal people do because, oh wait, we can't take that money because that money came from X business.
And I predict, and maybe you all have done market research on this, I don't know, but I would predict that most congressmen don't know this. Because you wouldn't think that a business that is a storefront and a sign on the corner couldn't have a bank account and couldn't like pay its people. You just would assume everything was fine. So I wouldn't assume that the people who are against you know all of the facts on the ground. There was a time when I didn't. And I had to learn it. And so that's why I think educating, and people be like, that's crazy. I mean, that was my reaction when I found that. That's crazy. And again, you're talking to someone who did not vote for Amendment 3 in Florida, and did not vote when it was on the ballot for medical marijuana. But the horse is out of the barn, and now we have to make the best of it. And I wouldn't assume that people know these things.
And for the records, safer banking has passed the House 7 times, maybe 8 times, I've lost track. It's passed out of the Senate Banking Committee, but it seems to have stalled a little bit despite then Senator Daines' efforts. And I think, personally, if the president were to move, which I'm going to go to next on rescheduling, I think the next obvious thing is to deal with the banking issues. So let's talk about President Trump for a second. As you said, President Trump does what he wants to do, when he wants to do it, et cetera. If we're just patient, it will eventually get there. I mentioned his tweet and his public statements, et cetera, that he has, starting in September of 2024, and then since then, he's actually, I would argue, done more than most administrations, at least rhetorically. We're not there yet, I admit it. But what do you think happens with rescheduling President Trump, sort of the politics of it, the timing of it? Obviously, people in this room wish it happened yesterday or last month or 6 months ago, but here we are. So where do you think we stand with rescheduling?
Well, I don't know. I mean, President Trump's kind of a busy guy, saving the world and all. It takes a lot of time. And I told you when I got my endorsement, he does things when he's going to do them. What I would say is continue to make friends. People like me, people like Joe, make friends who can push and bring up these issues. And I think we're always looking for friends. I think the president's looking for friends, and I would continue to work at it that way. I know we're out of time, so I would just wrap up by saying, look, I appreciate all of you coming to Washington. It's freezing, so if you came from somewhere with warm weather, a double thank you. And I appreciate you being involved in the process, because that is the way the process changes. It is. I have learned in my 7 months that what regular people think about has absolutely nothing to do with what Washington thinks regular people think about. One quick story as we wrap up, everyone was talking about Epstein and those issues. I did 81 events in my district in August, and I didn't have a single person ask me about it, one way or the other. If you were up here, you would think that's all anyone cared about. So you being here and going and advocating, you can tell people what people actually believe, because if you spend too much time in Washington, you have absolutely no idea what people believe. Fortunately, I've got 2 kids at home, and so I go home every weekend to see them, and they remind me of what I should care about, as do everyone else that I represent. But thank you for having me. I appreciate all of you being here, and thanks for making your voice heard in the process.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. All right, so next up, we've got a panel on publicly traded cannabis featuring Aaron Miles, Christine Hersey, and Michael Salomon.